Hi there. Let's talk about the Vietnam War by president. Who? So these were the presidents that had a role in the Vietnam War, and we're going to talk about the things that they did and the effects of what they did. So first, we have Truman, and I know he started being president in 1945, but the Vietnam War doesn't really, quote unquote, start, or any Vietnam concerns didn't really start until 1946, although technically the war itself didn't really start until 1954, but we'll talk about that. But there's still things that he did. Then we have Eisenhower. It might be kind of hard to tell. You should take that Mike and Nike box off your face, if that's what that is. I can't tell if that's what that is, but he was president from 1953 to 1961. Then we have JFK, but as we know, he wasn't president for all that long because he got assassinated. Then we have Lyndon B. Johnson, who was president from 1963 to 1969, and then Richard Nixon from 1969 to 1974. And if you see over here, I don't know what Jimmy Carter's trying to do. It looks like he's climbing a pile of peanuts for some reason, but he thinks that he had a part in the Vietnam War. Sorry, you didn't. You know that it ended before you were president. Sorry, but you did not do anything about the Iranian hostage crisis. Okay, Truman, what did he do? Well, his policy, he only had financial support to South Vietnam. Sorry, that is definitely not correct. There we go. Let's change that. Sorry about that. Only financial support to France, because there was no South Vietnam yet. What would ye have to deal with? Well, it was not Vietnam yet. It was called Indochina. Well, also including other things around there, but Vietnam was part of Indochina back then, controlled by France. But in 1946, there was Ho Chi Minh. He gathered a protest against France, and they had a thing sort of like the Declaration of Independence, but for Vietnam against France, as if France is the Britain and the Ho Chi Minh is the America. But so, and the Truman Doctrine expresses why, because he seemed like communist to many people. So that's why we supported France. Now we have Eisenhower, and he's really the president when pretty much the war actually started, because really the war didn't, I already said that, the war didn't really start with Truman. But with Eisenhower, his policy was to support only South Vietnam. But how did we end up with Vietnam in the first place? Well, in 1954, there was something called the Geneva Conference, and it was caused by the French defeat in a battle of Dien Bien Phu. And essentially, Indochina was broken up. France had to leave, and Cambodia, Laos, and North and South Vietnam were created. And they were created by the 17th parallel. So the different parallels to remember, I mean, there was 49th parallel, there's a 38th Korea, but 17th for this one. And the South, the North was communist, and it was led by Ho Chi Minh. Remember, we just said about him on that. Then the South was democratic, quote unquote, and we'll see why in a minute. And that was led by Diem. And why I put the quotes in there? Diem was a brutal dictator that caused America to look bad. So essentially, it's like that. It made people start to think, well, communism must be better than democracy, because think about it, like, gosh, look at who they put into power there. And Diem was supposed to allow free elections, and if he did, then the Vietnams would unite, but Diem was bad and didn't listen. So there ended up being a civil war. There was something called the Viet Cong that pretty much took over. I mean, not took over necessarily, but they had a lot of revolts, and they were pretty much backed and supported by communist men. Okay, Kennedy, he kind of had a similar policy to Eisenhower. We're not putting troops over there, but we're supporting South Vietnam with money. But really, he didn't have to deal with that much. He had bigger concerns like the Cuban Missile Crisis to worry about. And like we know, he was not president for that long because he got assassinated. Lyndon B. Johnson, though, he's the major person that escalated the Vietnam War. Policy. He actually did send troops to Vietnam, and a lot of them. Well, why? Well, there was something called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And after there was a surprise explosion, Johnson decided, well, he was given the power to do anything needed. I think it was considered a blank check. He could do anything he wanted, essentially, to stop the spread of communism. That's how desperate people were. So he was like, okay, troops. And then it went crazy. And the president power also increased. But obviously, we have the War Powers Act of 1973 that ended this ability. But anyways, that's what happened. 1968, there was a battle called the Tet Offensive. And Tet is a holiday. So it was a surprise attack on the South from the North. It was like, they are not going to think that we would attack on this day. And then they did. But even though surprise, America still won with a whole bunch of deaths and casualties. And obviously there's a lot of TVs. And when there's the TVs, people see that and they're like, oh, that's terrible. And they make it seem like it was a loss. So there was a lot of protests from college students, like in the Kent State University protests. And Martin Luther King, although he got assassinated in 1968, he was mad. He said the Vietnam War takes focus off of the problems at hand domestically, which are civil rights. And other doves, which remember are people that don't want the war, were mad too. Then you have Richard Nixon. Nixon had a policy of let's take those troops out. So the opposite of what Lyndon B. Johnson did. And this is called Vietnamization. It's like, all right, let's take these out. And he de-escalated the war. He didn't have to deal with any specific battles, but it was a success. Sort of a success. We successfully got all the troops out, but really the South Vietnamese lost the war by the fall of Saigon in 1975. So the Vietnam War was not necessarily an American defeat, but it was a South Vietnamese defeat. We never got to be defeated because we just pretty much left the war. But this is what all the presidents did. It went from financial support to Johnson bringing troops in, and then Nixon taking them out, and then it ending. So that is the Vietnam War by president.